You are listening to the cycling podcast at the Tour de France, in association with Rafa, celebrating the sport and producing the finest cycling clothing since 2004. Today we are in Pau.
Hello, my name is Richard Moore with François Thomazeau.
Hello there.
And Lionel Birnie.
Hello, Richard.
Well, where are we, Lionel?
We're in the dining room of our hotel in Moorlas. This is this La France Profonde, or is this? This is 1970s France.
Often it's the same actually. You know, La France Profonde, deep France, is sometimes kind of 30 or 40 years. Kind of behind in terms of style and sometimes we were just walking to the local bar and they were playing Michael Jackson. You had guys
number one in the local hit parade.
That's right. You had guys in polka dot jerseys. Well, actually befriending Brits, English supporters, and obviously pastis and beer were mixing up quite heavily, but in a friendly atmosphere. So yes, we're not far from Pau actually, where the stage finished. I heard, it's probably true, that this place, Moorlas, used to be the capital of Béarn, which is now Pau, of course. It doesn't show.
It's a sleepy little place, isn't it?
The tumbleweed comes past on the hour, every hour, I think.
How long can we avoid talking about today's stage for, do you think?
Until now.
Okay, tail the tap, please, Lionel.
Stage 11 from Eymet to Pau, 203.5 kilometres. Marcel Kittel won his fifth stage of the race. Well done, Marcel. Dominant performance yet again. Won almost half the stages so far. 5 out of 11, very impressive. But it was quite a snoozy day. 3 riders went in the break. Marco Mercato of UAE Team Emirates, Mathieu Bodnar of Bora Hansgrohe, and Frédéric Baquet of Wanty Group Goubert. Baquet made it 500 kilometres out in front on his own during this tour. That's quite a milestone for him. Wanty really have been the team of the breaks.
One could almost say breakaway kings.
Indeed, yes. With 28 kilometres to go, Bodnar went clear on his own, and he gave the stage more kind of nail-biting drama than it deserved, really. He held on very well until 250 metres from the line, when there was a real sense of inevitability about the sprint. Kittel won it ahead of Groenewegen, Dylan Groenewegen of Team NL.
Well pronounced.
NL Jumbo. Edvald Bosenhagen of Dimension Data was third. Michael Matthews fourth, and Britain's Dan McClay fifth. Andre Greipel was seventh, which is a bit better than yesterday, and Nasser Bouhanni was eighth. We didn't mention his clash with Jack Bauer, where he appeared to lash out with a fist at some point during yesterday's stage, because we hadn't seen the incident at the time that we recorded, but that's sort of storm in a teacup, blew up overnight and then simmered down again and went cold. There were also a few crashes today. Jakob Fuglsang of Astana crashed in the feed zone along with his teammate Dario Cataldo, who's now out of the race. That's a blow for Fabio Aru of Astana. Alberto Contador came down twice, the second time quite near the end of the stage, but he got back on. Roman Bardet also came down but wasn't badly hurt. No change overall. Chris Froome still in the lead. Warren Barguil is still the king of the mountains. Simon Yates is in the white jersey, and Marcel Kittel now has a very big lead, 133 points in the green jersey competition, ahead of Michael Matthews. Tomorrow, more climbing. Hopefully the race will reawaken. We're into the Pyrenees and the Porte de Balès, followed by the Périssourde.
Indeed. Stage 11 today, wasn't it?
It was.
And if I am not mistaken, it was on stage 11 last year that Magic Bodnar was away in a little group with Peter Sagan, Geraint Thomas and Chris Froome into Montpellier crosswind stage, very exciting stage, where Sagan tried to engineer a win for Bodnar. It didn't quite work. He was fantastic today. We saw another Bora rider, Lucas Postelberger at the Giro, hold off the marauding bunch in the final kilometre on that occasion. But he rode very, very well and almost pulled it off, really, caught in the final few hundred metres. I spoke to his teammate, Jay McCarthy, the Australian, at the finish. Shall we hear what he had to say? Here's Jay McCarthy.
We were hoping with everything that he could stay out there. He's strong in the time trial, and he rides the breakaway well. He's had success in breakaways before, and definitely we had a good chance there today, and he'll be a little bit disappointed just because how close it is, but he gave it everything, and I think everyone's proud of him.
It's the hardest thing to do, that, isn't it? But he's a very strong rider.
Yeah, definitely, and it's also he would have had to be able to talk to the other breakaway companions and play with the peloton a little bit. You can't just go out there and go full gas all day, so he would have known how to time his effort, and nearly paid off.
You had a man in the breakaway today, obviously, but the breaks have been notable for being very small. Why do you think it is that more teams are not trying to get riders in breakaways?
I think with the sprint stages have been fairly easy, I guess. So and with the way Kittel's been riding, and the fact is that they can bring it back pretty easy generally. So there's no real medium stages so far. It's kind of been either hilltop finish or really hilly days or just flat days. So I think in the next couple of days, hopefully we'll start seeing a few more breakaways going further into the race.
Well, Rich, you say Bodnar was impressive. He really was. I was standing out on the course with a couple of kilometres to go, and he came round the roundabout, hands on the drops, head down, looking under his arm at the bunch, which was almost upon him. I mean, the bunch didn't catch him too early, did they? They left him out there till 250 metres to go, but there was never really any question that he was going to hang on. But standing out on the course, I missed the end of the stage because I was...
you had a very important job to do.
I had a very important job to do. I went and did all our laundry today because Monsieur at our last B&B offered to do the laundry for us, but unfortunately left it all overnight in a damp heap. So it was getting a bit musty this morning, wasn't it? So I went and redid it. So I'm hoping to win Podcaster de Charme this weekend. If there's a poll for that,
there isn't.
Oh, but no.
But Peddler de Charme, there is a poll for that, and we'll be launching that for week 2 tomorrow, Thursday. So get your nominations in for Peddler de Charme.
Well, I would think Bodnar would be up there because he looks great on a bike. He looks like he's got a sort of time trial position on his road bike, very still. Upper body, straight back, classic kind of position.
You know, I'd vote for Alfredo with our Peddler de Charme because he was nominated the first time, didn't quite make the cut. What he did yesterday, and his, and the way he tried to, remotivate the troops to make the race more exciting, and his proposal for the future of the breakaway, saying that points should be awarded to escapees. I mean, he's quite a swashbuckling, flamboyant rider, and he's both modern and and vintage. He's a fine combination of a rider. He's interesting. He's funny. He's great to watch. I think he's a great character. He would be a timely, I think, successor to Taylor Finney for the Peddler de Charme.
I think he'd wear it well.
But the man of the day again, Marcel Kittel. That's 5 stage wins for him, and by my reckoning, there's 3 more opportunities for him. Stage 16 to Romans-sur-Isère after the next rest day on Tuesday looks very inviting for the sprinters. Then on the final Friday, the stage to Salon de Provence is long and flat, and then of course the Champs-Élysées in Paris. We might expect to see breakaways succeed, but because of the flat nature of those 3 stages in the final week, we could see Marcel Kittel win 8 stages in this race, and I need to look up when the last time that happened was, so I will do that.
Freddie Maertens won 7 in 1976.
Didn't Mario Cipollini equal Charles Pélissier record at some stage in the 1990s? And I think there was 8 stage wins during the same tour. I think Charles Pélissier was the first to do it.
Go back to the 20s there, are we not?
Charles Pélissier, he was the third. You're right. It's the late 20s, absolutely, yeah.
So we could be looking at a record being equalled that's 90 years old. Goodness.
Well, we really should have looked this up before we started.
Well, why don't we hear a message from our sponsors? We'll look it up, and then we'll order our dinner, and then we'll come back.
Good idea.
Hi, I'm Patrick. I'm a graphic designer here at Rafa. My favourite cycling jersey, I've got like a bit of a penchant for like horrible Euro kit. I found on eBay a long time ago a kit from a team called Falaschi, and I think they were a sort of Italian continental team back in the 90s, and it's, if you imagine a pink highlighter pen, a blue highlighter pen, and then throw in some incredibly garish provincial sponsors, logos, like I think there's a cement company on there, and I think there's like a bricklayers logo, something like that. Yeah, it's pretty pretty rowdy. It's so quintessentially Euro cycling of a certain era that I've got a certain love for it. But then more recently, I think the copy collection that we've just produced is absolutely stunning and is just timeless.
The Rapha Cycling Club is the largest global community of its kind. Members share their passion for the road through rides, events, exclusive club kits and racing. Find out more at rapha.cc.
Thank you very much indeed to Rapha, our main sponsor. A reminder that as part of their Rapha Rising July Challenge, that the best place to watch the Tour de France, if you're not in France, is at your local Rapha clubhouse. There will also be open group rides out to conquer local climbs and special climbing and Tour de France events. Find out more at rapha.cc/Rapha Rising. Now, we've been doing a little bit of research, haven't we, Lionel?
Well, we have. I've looked through the menu and chosen what I'm... Oh, you mean Tour de France research?
Not that research. I got it wrong. Freddy Maertens did win 8 stages in 1976.
He did. Well, Charles Pélissier won 8 in 1930. Eddy Merckx also won 8 in 70 and 74. This is pure speculation because there are other sprinters in the race, but if Marcel Kittel were to win 8, that would be a really impressive modern day record.
The first real sprinter since Charles Pélissier, because Charles Pélissier in 1930 it was only sprints, whereas Freddy Maertens also won a time trial, I think, and or the prologue.
And were you covering the tour with Charles Pélissier?
That's
François.
My father could have actually, because he was 8 at the time, but no, unfortunately.
I know. I'm just curious about whether, when you describe him as a sprinter, did we have were there bunch sprints in those days?
Yeah, well, as far as I remember, you had bunch sprints, but it was actually a little bit different because the sprinters sprinted from farther than they do now. Actually, the sprints we see on the tour this year are kind of rather similar to the 1930, because there were no trains at the time. I mean, it was the idea of a train or a lead-out man didn't exist, but the strong men just moved to the front in this period, and so you'd have the kind of 10 or 15 fastest guys going to the front for the sprint finish. Nobody would bother, nobody would try to disturb them, and they didn't need a train. It was like a man's contest between them.
A train in those days was something you jumped on to try and cheat.
Henri
exactly.
Desgrange came down rather hard on that in 1904.
On the trains, so, trains were banned.
Yeah, and Charles Pélissier was at the time the fastest guy on the peloton. He was the brother of Henri Pélissier, who won the Tour in 1923. Remember the
famous quote.
Yeah, well, and the two brothers. Actually, Charles was the youngest of them, because the other brother was François, and the famous story about doping in 1924. When they told a reporter what they had in their bag, and it was full of cocaine, arsenic.
And Henri Pélissier. So there were some rumours later that they may have exaggerated a little bit.
Yeah, they probably did.
Henri Pélissier also suffered a very messy end.
He was killed by his mistress.
Well, his wife committed suicide, and then his mistress killed him with the gun that his wife had used
in 1936. Yeah, the gruesome finish. We hope for no Tour de France riders these days to finish this way. But it was quite the Pélissier were quite characters. They were the enemies of Henri Desgrange. He hated them. But there you are. We went quite a long way
back. But going back to that interview that they did it was because they pulled out of the race, hadn't they, in protest?
Yeah, absolutely.
It
was in Avranches, near Avranches. It's not in Avranches, but it was a stage in Normandy. We were actually there last year, when with the staff from Mont Saint-Michel, and they were actually at odds with Henri Desgrange, the tour director, and especially Henri. They couldn't stand one another.
And he was defending champion.
He was defending champion, and Henri he put on 2 jerseys, and at the time jerseys were pretty thick, because he had a tendency to sweat, and if he found that if he had only one jersey, he used to caught colds. So he decided in either to kind of challenge Desgrange, but also pretending it was for his health. He wore 2 jerseys that day, and he was disqualified for that. Well, at least he was given a fine.
You had to finish the stage in the clothes that you started in.
Yeah, exactly. So he said, so learning that he might be punished, he said, "Well, I'm done. I'm done. I'm not going on with this stage and with this race. I mean, Desgrands is just and so his brother François gave up with him, and there was a third rider who was actually dropped at the time. He was French champion. I can't remember his name. And they all sat in a bar by the railway station in this place, and held kind of press conference to say why they were giving up.
Which is more than Sky have done in this race.
Absolutely. And there was this guy called Albert Londres. He was the most famous journalist of the time, who was not a cycling specialist.
Was he a war correspondent or something? Or?
He was a war correspondent. Yeah, he died, I think, in 1931. He disappeared. He went to Japan for a war there, and he came back on a boat to France, and the boat sank, I think. So he had quite an eventful life and career, Albert Londres. He's still high up, in the tradition of French journalism. Yeah, I mean, there's a Albert Londres Award given every year to the best journalist in France, so he was quite someone, But he was quite someone. But as we know, riders and the peloton can kind of, how could I say, transfigure reality from time to time. And if you don't belong to the cycling mafia, sometimes you can trust things that are, well, more or less trustworthy. And Albert Londres took for granted that idea that there were arsenic, strychnine, and whatever in the bag. We'll never know. We'll never know.
Well, let's fast forward through the decades back to 2017.
Well, did you mention that Merckx also won 8 stages?
Yeah, in 1970 and 74. Yeah.
So this is what Marcel Kittel. This is a carrot dangling in front of Marcel Kittel.
Yeah, I mean we're scratching around a little bit for talking points today, aren't we? I mean we could talk about Nacer Bouhanni and whether he was fortunate to get away with only a 30-second time penalty, which slips him a couple of places down the overall.
Well, it looked like watching the footage. It looked like Jack Bauer was moving up his outside and made contact with him first, and Nacer Bouhanni lashed out a bit. As they say in football, I've seen them given. I've seen that. Andrei Grifko, who's riding the Tour this year, was punished earlier the year for punching Marcel Kittel. Yeah.
I mean, obviously on social media yesterday there was a clamour for, is this as bad as the Sagan thing, or what about Chris Froome's loss of balance with Fabio Aru? I mean, I was thinking this morning that when you see social media all getting into a lather about the controversy and then going back and looking at previous incidents and thinking, well, is this the right punishment for this? Is this the right punishment for that? The Tour de France is gloriously inconsistent. It changes every day. The rules are interpreted in a different way every day. Different things happen every day.
So very French.
It's all and part of the glory and the beauty of the event is that. And I think that I don't know whether it's a generational thing. Are we sort of expecting a kind of a clinical, consistency to every single day's racing? I think if people are expecting that, then they're just going to be constantly disappointed because, last year on Mont Ventoux we saw that the rules were applied in, an inaccurate way, really, and the race went on, and had the rules been applied strictly to the letter on Mont Ventoux, then the outcome would have been completely different, and we would have seen a totally different race. And so it is interesting. But Bouhanni is not, it's not unknown. He's quite a hot-headed character, and he must be getting frustrated because he is a very good sprinter, but he's been really below par in this race.
Well, as you know, he crashed in the Tour of Yorkshire and he's struggling to get back on it. He had suffered concussion, and it's probably pretty tricky for him to get back to his best level. So there was a bit of frustration there. And from what I saw of the video it looks obvious that Jack Bauer kind of elbows him in the first place, and then maybe the reaction is a little bit too violent. And the problem with Bouhanni is because of his reputation as a hot-tempered sprinter. I guess probably he suffers from kind of double standards against him. I'd like to talk about Andre Greipel because is a guy who has won Tour stages almost every year with very strong consistency. This year So I know, Lionel, that you announced his decline.
I'm not sure it was me, actually, was it? Who was it who called him a fading force?
Probably Daniel.
Yeah,
it's probably Daniel.
Daniel.
Right,
Daniel.
sorry, Lionel. I blame you for for claims you didn't make. But really, this year, as far as we know, he hasn't had any particular problems. His Lotto team are very, very strong with Adam Hansen last back and everything. And it doesn't get it. You have the impression he sprints like the riders sprinted like 10 years ago or maybe even 5 years ago with a very consistent train leading him out, but it doesn't work these days.
Interesting, Kittel even mentioned him in his press conference, said that Lotto Soudal said we're clearly keeping faith with Greipel. And he said if they didn't ride like that one day, it would show a loss of confidence in Greipel, make him even less likely to win the stage. He also pointed out, Kittel, that it took Greipel until the Champs-Elysees last year to win a stage of the Tour. So he does tend to, ride into it a bit, but he's well off the pace. And we were going to talk as well just about beyond the sprinting, because we have had all these Kittel stage wins. We may yet have more. There's another feature of this year's race that's surprising a few people. We heard Johan Fredo last night complain about the fact that so few teams want to go in breakaways. I spoke to a couple of people at the finish about this. One of them was Birnie Eisel. He didn't really understand why so few teams are trying to get in breakaways. I asked him about why the lead doesn't tend to go out beyond 3-4 minutes. He pointed out Bodnar almost held them off today, but he did make a wider point about the motorbikes. He thought the motorbikes getting closer and closer to the front of the bunch and also to the breakaway was keeping the pace like 46, 47 kilometres an hour, very fast indeed. I also asked Matt White, the sports director at Orica Scott, about this, and here's what he had to say.
Yeah, I think it's the course. I think when you came at the start of the tour, we had probably 10 teams with legitimate winners and legitimate leaders for the sprints. A few of those guys have gone home now, and I think the sprint stages, they have been pure sprint stages. So there hasn't been too much for the opportunists, like not a climb near the final, not a slight uphill finish. So I think cycling in general has changed, and I think with the courses this year, it's a sort of the guys have been very, very conservative. And I'm really surprised. Like today, there was a real opportunity for crosswind to put in the gutter, and nothing happened. So yeah, it's a surprise in some way. But then when you look at the course, maybe not so much, because there just hasn't been much for the opportunist top rider.
It's strange as well that the gaps used to be 7-8 minutes, especially if you've got 2 guys or 3 guys on a break. They're not being given more than 3 or 4 minutes. Why is that?
I think it's just easy to control if you leave it around the 2 to 3 minute mark. It's just otherwise it's a big surge in that last hour to get the guys back. Whereas I think it's a lot more calculative now.
Interesting for Matt White there, he's kind of blaming the course, and there's not a lot of incentive on a stage like today or yesterday for the breakaway to be bolstered. But we had an interesting email from a colleague of ours, Ben Atkins, who kind of blamed the peloton really for not playing fair. They're not upholding their side of the bargain because they're keeping the gaps down to sort of 3 or 4 minutes rather than giving the break a sporting chance. And if you've only got 3 guys today, 2 guys yesterday, and they only get 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, it's absolutely inevitable. There's not even a pretense that there's some suspense in the final 50 kilometres. I mean, that's why I said earlier, Bodnar gave the stage a sense of drama that it didn't really deserve. Because the odds were so heavily stacked against him, and really it was a superhuman effort by him to give us something to be excited about in the final 10 kilometres. But the peloton, when I can remember several years ago when there was all the talk about taking away their race radios, and all the riders said, well, if you do that, all that will happen is we'll keep the break on an even shorter leash, and we won't let them get 8, 9, 10 minutes and run the risk of not catching them. But that now seems to have happened anyway.
There was funny. I talked with Yvon Madio this morning, the FDG team director, who still has a good sprinter actually, Davide Cimolai. They don't have a train. There are only 5 of them, but Cimolai was in the top 6 today, I think.
He was indeed, yeah.
and he was telling me the way it works in the peloton. He said actually Julien Vermote, who is the guy who leads the train, well, leads actually the punch for Quick Step and for Marcel Kittel. Apparently in the morning is the one who gives the green lights to guys to go. He says you can go, you can go, you can go. Oh, your Lotto, you can't go. You're in the GC container, you can. And he's the guy delivering the the go ahead. So it's interesting because it's part of the job. We mentioned this guy last back, but it's actually the way it goes. These guys are really the keepers of the bunch, and they say, okay, you can go, you can't go, and that's something we don't see on TV, but it really happens.
Well, yeah, they said to BMC Stefan Kung yesterday he couldn't go in the break and basically shut him down, but let the other two go. I mean, yeah, fortunately we're back into the mountains tomorrow, so we don't necessarily need to worry about this again until next week, because the next 4 stages, we've got 2 proper mountain stages, 2 hilly stages. Hopefully the breakaways will have a chance on Saturday and Sunday. Before we go to our next little advertisement, Richard, this morning I popped to the barbers in the village. Now don't laugh.
They must have wondered why.
They did. Funnily enough, they did look at me and think, what does this guy need to visit the barbers for? He doesn't have any hair to cut. But I had a quick chat with Mathieu and Julien, who are running the barber in the Tour de France village.
Hi, welcome to the barber shop. So I'm Mathieu and Julien, he's the barber. It's make 3 years we are in the Tour de France. Every morning we cut hair or a beard for every people, and the last hour is time for the runner.
So do many cyclists visit you each morning?
Yeah, every morning we have 2 or 3 runners.
Who have you had so far this tour?
Romain Bardet, the French runner, come every week. Simon Geschke, the German runner.
He has a magnificent beard.
Yeah. The beautiful beard of the peloton. And every day we have runners for the haircut or for the beard. He comes and let's go.
You've been very busy here. How many haircuts or shaves do you do each morning?
10, 12 by day.
In your opinion, who has the best hair in the peloton?
Calme Jeanne.
No question.
No question. Calme Jeanne.
The Cycling Podcast is supported by Science in Sport. Science in Sport, fueled by science.
Thank you very much indeed to Science and Sport for sponsoring the Cycling Podcast. A reminder that you can get 20% off all your Science in Sport products at sciencesport.com with the code CPOD20. One or two of you have said you've had problems with that code. There shouldn't be a problem with the code, but I have checked with Science and Sport. But do let us know if you are having a problem, and we will chase that up. But yeah, CPOD20 at sciencesport.com. Lionel's making a sign at me. What are you making a sign at me for, Lionel?
Well, we're going to our little package on Tom Simpson, aren't we? Because tomorrow is the 50th anniversary of Tom Simpson's death on Mont Ventoux.
Chris Froome was asked about that in his press conference tonight, and about the legacy of Tom Simpson. We thought we'd speak to a few of our colleagues who've written books either about or connected to Tom Simpson. They are William Fotheringham, who wrote Put Me Back on My Bike in Search of Tom Simpson, Jeremy Whittle, who's written a book recently about Mont Ventoux, and Andy McGrath, who works for Rouleur magazine and has written a book, Bird on the Wire, about Tom Simpson, with a lot of new photographs in there, or rediscovered photographs.
But we'll kick off with William Fotheringham.
I think I already knew that he was a great cyclist. I think that I already knew. And William Fotheringham, cycling writer at The Guardian and the author of Put Me Back on My Bike in Search of Tom Simpson. But I think what I didn't really realise about him as a cyclist was the breadth of his sort of thirst for knowledge. Just how that people talk about, some of the better cyclists being like sponges for information. Well, Tom was that kid who just wanted as much information as he could get, and the interesting thing was that extended outside cycling as well. So he was just avid for knowledge about anything. He learned languages quickly. He could make puns in French. I think it was that thirst for life that probably surprised me, and the if you like, the sort of the fact that this wasn't just a bloke who sat on a bike and pedalled and happened to die, in a very, very high profile way, in quite scandalous circumstances. This was a very, very much a human being. I think when you try to be as forensic as I was attempting to be, you can't help but divide up the various bits of his life. Plus, also, it was a strange biography because I wrote it in a non-linear way. I didn't really start at A and go, end up at Z. I started at Z and sort of then dotted back to various bits in his life. So it was a curious structure. I didn't really set out to divide the doping question away, and what I did set out to do was to go into the doping question in as much detail as I possibly could, because the one thing that was very, very obvious was that you couldn't separate the way in which the guy died from the person he was. He probably wouldn't have died if he'd been a different sort of person. He might have died in a different way, but he probably wouldn't have died on Mont Ventoux having taken too many amphetamines and drunk some cognac. Had he been a different sort of guy. These aren't black and white stories, These are stories, on a spectrum of morality, on different places on a spectrum of morality, but they're about complex people with complex issues. And I think, just to say he took drugs, he was a bad guy is really, it's doing a massive disservice, not to him, but to the way in which we should look at people in general. Well, I think we should remember him for the complete person he was, for the whole person he was. He was all sorts of things, but then that's the nature of people. People are very, very diverse creatures, within themselves. And so I think we should remember him for what he was. He was a great cycling champion. He was a father who, obviously had a very short, family life with his children. It was quite surprising the level of love that Helen Simpson clearly still felt for him when I interviewed her 35 years on. That was quite astonishing, considering he'd been dead for so long and she'd been remarried for so long. That was quite astonishing. And so he clearly inspired many people, but at the same time we should not forget the guy cheated and he died in a way which was quite ignominious in some senses.
For me, the mythology of Simpson and the whole debate about that is pivotal to our understanding of where cycling is now.
My name's Jeremy Whittle. I'm an author and journalist, and my new book is called Ventoux: Sacrifice and Suffering on the Giant of Provence.
I think, unfortunately, he's been kind of forgotten, and he's been lumped in with the other dopers, all the other dopers. I talked to Joanne Simpson, his daughter, for the book, which was very moving, meeting her, and very powerful experience. And one of the things I learned there was about kind of that idea that there was a definitive Simpson story, of the guy who pushed himself too far, had heat exhaustion, had been ill, had dehydration, and topped it all off with alcohol and amphetamines. And her version of that is different. And it's clear we've been handed down one version of history, but there is another version as well. And she still contests the idea that he died because of amphetamines. And she went off in pursuit of the autopsy from the hospital in Avignon. And she needed to know, and the more I talked to her, the more I understood that as his daughter, she definitely needed to know the truth. And she said, I can handle the truth, I'm not scared of the truth, but I just need to know for sure that all these tales and counter-tales, this history, what's the truth of this history? And sadly, they kept the autopsy for 30 years, so they kept it till 97, and then she's found out recently that they destroyed it. It was destroyed with the rest of the archive of autopsies, so she's never going to know for herself what the truth was. And apparently the family never saw it.
Tom Simpson is extremely well known, renowned for being the man who died on Mont Ventoux, but there's so much more to him than that. I'm Andy McGrath, the managing editor of Rouleur magazine and author of Tom Simpson, Bird on the Wire. He had such a vivacious, larger-than-life character, a very attacking racing style, and pioneering achievements for a Brit. He was the first to win the Tour of Flanders, Milan-San Remo, Bordeaux-Paris. I could go on, Paris-Nice. I think people kind of overlook exactly what he achieved. He's probably still Great Britain's finest one-day racer, and that just appreciates over the years with more riders that come out in the modern British cycling system and don't get close to matching him.
if that's whetted your appetite for all things Mont Ventoux, maybe sign up as a friend of the podcast for last year. Well, sign up for a friend of the podcast for this year as well, of course, if you haven't done already. But last year I made a piece called Heat, Wind and Fear, a story of Mont Ventoux, and that was one of our Friends of the Podcast specials last year. You can sign up for all 3 years of our special episodes, that's 2015, 16 and 17, for £25 at thecyclingpodcast.com.
We should also mention our Kilometre Zero episodes, which go out Monday to Friday mornings, supported by Niederberg Wines. This morning's was a conversation that Lionel had with Michael Rasmussen, who 10 years ago was expelled from the Tour de France while in the yellow jersey. And it's a really fascinating chat, that very, very disconcerting in a lot of ways, but really interesting. Tomorrow morning we've got a special one looking back at an old tour and those unwritten rules again, I suppose. And every weekday morning throughout the Tour de France. We should leave it for now and get our dinner, I think. Thank you very much, François.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Lionel.
Thank you, Richard.